Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I am here with author Bonni Goldberg, and we are here today talking about Judaism and writing Jewish characters. So if you guys are here with us, leave a comment below. Just say hi, let us know you're here watching the live with us. And so to start off, I always say this for each of my interviews. Bonni is going to be sharing with us her experiences and what she thinks writers should know when writing Jewish characters. And keep in mind that she does not speak for all Jewish people out there. That's always important to know. I say that every time. One person cannot represent a whole group of people. So keep that in mind. But I hope this will be very valuable and helpful for anyone watching. So Bonni, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit of your background about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm really glad to be here. My name is Bonni Goldberg, and I'm a writer. I write for adults, and I write what I call kidlit for kids. For adults, I work primarily or really exclusively in nonfiction, and I write about a variety of topics, and I have several books published. A couple of them are books for writers. They're not related to Judaism specifically, but one of them is called Room to Write, and I have a new one coming out very soon, I hope, called The Right Balance. And I also write about social justice issues and a variety of topics about women, all for adults. For kids, I write picture books and I write middle grade novels. And I've been Jewish all my life. I've also worked in the Jewish community as a Jewish communal professional. And so that has been a big part of my life. It's not that big a part of my life now, but it has, well, not professionally, it's not as a big part of my life, but it is still a very big part of my life. And I'm active where I currently work in promoting understanding of Jews and Judaism.
Awesome. It's cool.
Thanks.
So to get started here, my first question starting off is, can you give us a brief explanation of what Judaism is and what are the core beliefs?
Oh, well, the answer to that has to be no. I can't give you a brief explanation of what Judaism is and its core beliefs, but I can talk a little bit about it. I mean, there are volumes and hundreds of years written about that and still being written about it today. But for sort of a basic answer, which is what I think you're after, Judaism is a Western, well, Eastern Western religion, and basically it's a belief that there is only one God, and that God manifests in a single form, and that there are no idols or ways that God is represented. And there's a lot of, if you Google this, you're going to find the 13 tenets of Judaism and the fundamental this and the 3 and the 5 and the 7 ideas of what Judaism is. We happen to be moving into the Jewish high holidays. We're in the month of Elul. So the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar as opposed to a solar calendar. And we're in the middle of the month that leads up to the high holy days for Jews. And so in that cycle, we talk a lot about, or we pray a lot and we talk a lot about 3 tenets or 3 ideas. One is justice, and that includes social justice. Another is healing the world. And the third is loosely defined tzedakah as charity, but it's also more than charity. So Judaism begins with a covenant between God and Abraham. And this God, this covenant is God. I mean, this is a very loose thing here. I mean, I'm not a scholar on this, but essentially, God comes to the Jewish people or to Abraham and says, "Will you accept my covenant?" And the story goes in some traditions that God went to a lot of other people first, a lot of other groups. They were like, "Well, what is the covenant? Like, what are we saying yes to?" And that was like the wrong question. That blew it for them. But as Jews, we said, "Sure, we'll take that covenant." And then we said, "What is it?" So I don't know if that's, it's a kind of a joke, but it also, I think, is there may be some, I don't know. It's a story we hear as Jews often. And the covenant was to be God's chosen people, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what that means that create a lot of, or that is used a lot in anti-Semitic kinds of activity and language. But what we're chosen for is we accepted the covenant, and it's our job to help repair the world and follow the commandments, the 10 commandments that God gave everybody, but gave us specifically in the sense of being the ones chosen to use them and to go out there and repair the world.
Okay. So when you say repair the world, can you kind of elaborate on that? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's another thing that's like so much commentary and ideas on the idea of the world being broken in some ways. There's a lot of different levels of that, and there's contemporary ideas about it, and there's more ancient ideas about it, and there's more spiritual. I should say before I go any further that Judaism is a religion, but it is also, for some people, a culture and an ethnicity. So it's not one thing. When we talk about Judaism, it's really, that's a super important piece, is that some people look at Judaism as exclusively a religion, and that is not the way it is in the world, at least not in the modern world. There are people who identify as Jewish ethnically and as Jewish culturally who do not practice religious Judaism and don't even believe in God. So, but they consider themselves seriously Jewish. And there's a joke about that, which I'll tell you later if you want. But you've got to remind me.
I think I may have heard the joke. Isn't it something? Well, this is a joke I heard somewhere else, but it's like, what do you call a Jew who doesn't believe in God? A Jew.
That's a great one, but it's not the one I was going to tell you. Okay. I'll go ahead and tell it to you because, we're telling jokes, and humor is a really important part of Judaism. So this is a joke. It's a modern Jewish joke. It has a man as the main character, but you could have anybody in there that's Jewish. And so this parent, I'll say there's a parent, and the parent's child is getting ready to go to school. And the parent doesn't want, the parent's not religious and doesn't want the kid to go to any kind of religious school. So the parent sends the kid to public school. Kid comes back from school first day and says, "Wow, guess what? There's one God." And then came back the next day and said, "There's two gods." And then we learned today about three gods. And then the child came back and said, "Today we learned about four gods." And the parent says, "That's enough. No more. I'm going to tell you as your parent the truth. And this is the only truth. And that is, there's only one God, and we don't believe in him." So I think that encompasses some people's version of Judaism. Not everybody's, but it's just a funny joke.
I'm glad you pointed that out. That it's not just a religion, but also it's a culture and ethnicity. And because recently I heard that there's some people that are atheist Jews, which when
there are quite a number of them.
Right. When you first think about it, it kind of sounds like a contradiction, an oxymoron. Like, how are you atheist and a Jew? But it's interesting to hear that there are lots of Jews who may um, be culturally identify as it, but they don't have a belief in the God.
Right.
So
My father was an atheist Jew. He did not believe in God, and he was absolutely culturally Jewish. There's also a whole group of people there's a lot of different varieties of Judaism, a lot of different ways that people practice Judaism, even religiously and spiritually. So you can go from one end, which is extremely orthodox, very, very strictly adherent to a version of the Torah, which is our Bible, and the mitzvahs, of which there are hundreds, all the way to a group of Jews that are called the humanistic Jews. And they don't believe in God, but they come together regularly, as you would come to synagogue or with any of the other Jewish ways of following traditions and being spiritual, to come together, and they do a lot of learning about Jewish ethics and values. Because Judaism is very much connected to, at this point in time, the written word, the Torah, which is the central tenets that were delivered to us when Moses came down from the mountain at Mount Sinai, not at Mount Sinai, it came down from the mountain and was written down eventually by the rabbis after a whole bunch of historical things happened. And then there is the commentary that comes with that Torah, and that's referred to as Tanakh, which is another document which has a lot of information on the page, like a regular page, and then all around it, like this. So, like almost looks like an arch over, like a square arch over the actual writing, is commentary by different sages and rabbis and really it's wise men, but it should be wise people. And all that commentary is important and included. And some of the commentary is by more famous people or more well-regarded people, according to which kind of Judaism you follow. But they still keep the lesser commentary, the ones that are not popular. And the reason that is, now this is what I love about Judaism, the reason they keep that is because the rabbis and the rabbis and the people that were the what do you call them? The rabbis and the scholars and the sages were all aware of the fact that even though what they favor may be really important now and maybe the primary way of looking at things, that the world changes. And those, what I call minority reports, might come in handy and become actually central and important later. And so they can't be lost. They have to still be there. And that, for me, that's part of the essence of Judaism, is that it's about learning, it's about asking questions, it's about interacting with the commentary, with the Torah, with the prayers. That's another key factor in religious Judaism that also gets carried over into cultural Judaism or ethical Judaism, is that we're supposed to interact each individual is supposed to interact with the text and the prayer and the ritual and have an individual relationship with it and question it and talk with others and sort of support each other in challenging beliefs, or not beliefs, but interpretations, and becoming stronger and more perceptive and have more perspective because of it. And, I'm a writer. And so that appeals to me tremendously as a writer. In fact, I think it might be a little bit why I ended up a writer. It fits very well with my cultural Jewish identity.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, so going back to what you were saying about how you can fall in, like, there's like a whole spectrum where you can fall within Judaism. And I know you mentioned your dad was an atheist Jew. Where do you see yourself? Are you more culturally Jewish, or do you practice more of the spiritual, religious side of it? Where do you find yourself?
I grew up super culturally Jewish. Like there wasn't really anything else available to me because my father was an atheist and my mother was more culturally Jewish than she was religious. In fact, she was an existentialist. I grew up in a household with an existentialist and an atheist, and both of them were from Jewish homes, which is not untypical where I grew up on the East Coast. And I think now I have a spiritual Judaism as well, but I am purposely, intentionally unaffiliated. So I don't affiliate with any, I think denomination is kind of a strong word. I don't think it really is. We are denomination. Some people would argue that, but I don't think we are. But I don't consider myself, well, there were three main kinds of Judaism that began to develop, which was Reform Judaism, conservative Judaism, and Orthodox Judaism. In the old days, there was just Judaism, but then branches developed because of historical kinds of things that were going on in the non-Jewish world as well as in the Jewish world. And so those were the three main sort of identities. And then, but then there are lots of other ones that have developed and are not maybe as old, but old enough. There's Reconstructionist Judaism, there's Renewal Judaism, there's, like I said, humanistic, and there's a lot of other ones that are out there that I'm not as familiar with. But I intentionally do not identify with a particular, what I like to call flavor of Judaism. I'm a Jew, and I feel like it's my place in the world to stand in that space as not having to identify that way. I am culturally Jewish, I am spiritually Jewish, and I will not come down in one flavor or another, because I believe that we're just all Jews, and that's the most important thing. Then that we need to come together and not separate our identities. And there's much more that's the same, that's different, and a lot of people would argue about that, but that's where I am.
Okay. So for yourself, do you believe in a God?
I believe in God, but I would say that my definition of what that is may be very different from some other people. And yeah, so I would say that yes, I do believe.
Okay. Let me see here. Where did I? Okay, so my next question was about appropriate terms to use. So what are the appropriate terms? Is it, should we be saying Jewish person, or is it okay to say Jews, or does it depend on who's using the term?
I think that most people are comfortable with being called Jews, and it can have all kinds of tones to it and facial expressions and body language, and so that's a different piece. But the term Jew is not offensive to most people. In fact, I don't think I know anybody. I don't know everybody, but I don't think I know anybody who'd be offended by someone calling me a Jew or calling them a Jew or referring to the Jews. Although what you say about the Jews, when you say, well, the Jews, as a group, that may be a little more complicated, but individually calling somebody a Jew, they're a Jew, they're Jewish. I guess it's maybe a little, it's, saying I'm Jew, they're Jewish is maybe a little less edgy than saying they're a Jew, but I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Okay, cool. Taking a look at the comments real quick. I'm Wesley Lawrence Curry. Hi, Wesley. Glad to have you here. I'm doing great. Bonnie, how are you?
I'm great. I'm really glad to be here.
So, the man of the earth come to bring peace to all the world. And how is the bread kosher enough? I actually have a question about the diet later on.
Okay. So let me just go back for 1 minute, if you will. I have one more story to tell you about sort of what is Judaism. And this is a story that's told often around Passover because it has to do with Rabbi Hillel, and Rabbi Hillel plays a part in the ritual meal of Passover. So the story goes that Rabbi Hillel was approached by somebody who was not Jewish and said, "Hey, I'll convert to Judaism if you can stand on one foot and tell me the whole religion, like the whole thing, if you can stand on one foot and do that." And Rabbi Hillel said, "No problem." And he stood on one foot and he said, "I can do it actually in, like less than 2 minutes." And the guy was like, "Okay, give me what you got." And so Rabbi Hillel stood on one foot and he said, and I quote, "That which is despicable to you, do not do to your fellow." And then he got off onto his regular 2 feet and he said, "The rest is commentary."
Nice.
And that does go back to so much of Judaism is an ongoing conversation with the text, an ongoing conversation with the Torah and some of the other works and writings and tractates of the scholars and rabbis and sages and priests, and probably some women too, but we don't have as much of that as I wish we did.
So basically, the main important thing is treat others how you want to be treated.
Yep, the golden rule. Yep.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's interesting to note that it isn't do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's don't do things that you find despicable to your fellow. So again, this is one of those ways as a Jew and in Judaism that we really look at every single word and what is said as well as what's not said. So it's not about so much doing, it's about not doing. It's about don't do anything that you find despicable to anybody else.
Yeah.
And in Judaism, what follows is then you will only do, good works, kind works, just and merciful kinds of things. But we don't phrase it in the positive. We phrase it in the negative in this particular story. It's not all of Judaism looks at it that way, but it is interesting that Rabbi Hillel says that in the negative as not in the positive.
I actually think that's actually a smart idea because I feel like looking at it from a psychology point, humans tend to focus on things that are negative more so than the positive. We remember the negative and it stands out more to us than things that are positive.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's true.
So my next question relating to this one about terms are what terms should not be used or are considered derogatory towards Jewish people?
So derogatory words would be, let's see, we don't hear them as much anymore, but I almost don't want to say them because they're not very nice. And if people don't already know them, I don't want to spread them around. But there's the K word, and there's referring to a Jew as Shylock, which is an allusion to a Shakespeare play, Merchant of Venice, which is kind of saying that the person is kind of cheap and evil and money grubbing, which is one of the anti-Semitic tropes that are out there about Jews. And yeah, I think, well, one you might hear if you're in and around Orthodox communities, you might hear a term that Orthodox people use to describe each other, but that you wouldn't want to, which is the term Yid, Y-I-D. So that's one of those terms that is really meant to stay within the community itself. If you're not a Yid, you can't call somebody else a Yid.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and let's see.
Oh, we don't ever want anybody to use the word Jew as a verb. That's really bad. Like, oh, that person Jewed me. That is a huge anti-Semitic and terrible thing to say.
Good to know. My next question was, so we know historically that Jewish people haven't been treated fairly. They've been victims of genocide and major oppression. So in your experience, how do you think Jewish people are perceived today by others?
I think that there's a huge amount of anti-Semitism that exists today. I think it's pretty powerful, and that it's not all that different. If you look at the state of the Jewish people from the beginning through now, there have always been and continue to be groups of people with a certain amount of power who are looking to annihilate us, completely eliminate us from the planet. And there are a lot of Jewish tropes that are used and that people come back to again and again in order to look at the Jew as the other, as dangerous, as sneaky, as controlling. And I wanted to look it up. I forgot to do that. I'm sorry. But the Jews worldwide, okay, Jews make up like 0.0 something of the population. We are a tiny, tiny group of people. There are way more people of color. There are way more people of Hispanic / Latinx, whatever they prefer, people. There are way more disabled people. There are just more people of color. I mean, there's just more of almost everybody than there are Jews. And yet we have been persistently despised and scapegoated pretty much throughout history. And that, people say, oh, it's getting worse, it's getting better, it's getting worse, it's getting better. We are nomadic people. We are diaspora people. And that's something else I'll want to talk about, the difference between being an Israeli and a diaspora Jew. But we are, in one way or another, honestly blamed for so many things and held to standards that are somewhat higher than and unreasonable than other groups of people are. And that is painful and scary and difficult. So that's what I experience. We live in America, which is considered by some to be a secular culture, but in fact is a Christian culture, a Christian dominant culture. And we live as a minority with permission in this country that I'm in, the United States.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of the comments here. Wesley said Yid means full. And Jewish words, bad boom, mark of the 10, and the black. So are those like the words that shouldn't? I'm not sure what he means by this one.
I don't know what he means either. But within the Jewish community, Yid is not defined as fool. It means that you're a Jewish person, a Yid. At least in the circles that I communicate with. So this is the other thing, as we said, I'm not the ultimate expert, and I don't know all the Jews in all the world or all the different communities. So it's possible that in another community that might be a negative.
Okay. So let's see. So the next question was, which you kind of started answering this one, I believe, as well. But have you experienced any type of discrimination or microaggressions because of your Jewish heritage? And if so, how have you dealt with it?
The answer is yes, I have, often. And how I handle it depends on the given day, how much energy I have to give to it, and how important it is in that moment from the circumstance. So there are sort of, there's the ones that are most obvious, that I am subject to all things Christmas and Easter, and my work holidays and my and places of business have honor that as the time off. And if I want time off for what are my high holidays, that's not automatic. I have to take extra time for that. So I'm sort of, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it can be often because the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, fall on days because we're a lunar calendar. We don't have like a single, like, Christmas is always on December 25th, whenever December 25th happens to come along, whatever day of the week it is. But when you're on a lunar calendar, things change all over the place. And also because one still has to address like the I don't know the math of all this and the science, but I know that like we have in the solar calendar, in the Christian calendar, there's a leap year where we tack on an extra day. In Judaism, with the lunar calendar, we actually occasionally tack on an entire month, and that throws everything off again. So our high holidays can come anytime between, in my lifetime, they've come anytime between late August and into October. So you can't just go, oh, well, let's just make sure on this date, on this month, that we don't have anything going on, meetings or important events or work requirements, because that date is on the Jewish calendar, but not on the secular calendar. So that happens a lot. And, different people grow up with different understandings of who Jews are or whether they've ever met one. So there's a lot of microaggressions that come out inadvertently. But the place where I have the most struggle and have put the most energy into is in spaces of social justice spaces. So because I'm white presenting, and because not all, but there is a contingency of social justice workers that don't present white, that are also Christian, there's sort of this way in which I'm not identified as a minority or an oppressed person. And there's a concept of the privilege that I have, which I do have privilege, certainly, with white skin, with light skin. But the majority, a couple of different things about that. The majority of Jews worldwide are not necessarily white presenting. And some of them are lighter skinned and still might consider themselves white presenting, but they're all Jews. We're all Jews. And we're all, however much we can pass or not pass, comes at a very large price. It comes at being quiet. It comes at changing how I present myself. I'm sitting here today and my hands are, I'm holding on to my chair. And I'm doing that because if I don't, I'm like this all over the place, and it's considered unprofessional. It's considered aggressive. It's considered a lot of things. So I can't really be completely myself. I can't use terminology that I use among other Jews because it's not understood and it doesn't fall well. I just have to be really careful. I have who I am, who you're seeing here. I'm a little bit coming out, but not that much. And then I have how I am among other Jewish people when I'm in all Jewish spaces, or mostly Jewish or Jew adjacent spaces, as we'll sometimes call it. And I'm different. I sound different than I'm sounding now. My body language is different. I'm not self-conscious. There's a lot of it. So I deal with it by speaking out, like I'm doing today, and having conversations with other people that I feel like I have a relationship with, to talk about these things, to talk about the ways in which it is painful or difficult or complicated to be straddling both sides, the white privileged side and the oppressed side, knowing that really, if you just look at history, even recent history, that, it's really not up to me how long and how much of that privilege I have. So it's always cost me something, and it's always precarious. And I think a lot of people don't think about that because they're not given the opportunity to think about that. I think a lot of Jews don't even think about it. One of the things that we learned growing up and this is a big battle in Judaism, and that is how over history there's been two ways of surviving, because we've survived a really long time for this little tiny group of people. I mean, we're really a really incredible minority, and yet we've survived all these years. And people say, why is that? And this, that, and the other. Well, we have two survival strategies. One is a group of people who assimilate. And so the more you assimilate, the less you stand out and the more accepted you are for a period of time. It never lasts forever. So that's one camp of how to survive as a Jew. The other camp, or the other belief system, is to make sure to always carry on the traditions as they are, the form of dress, the form of speech, the form of action, everything, because as soon as you dilute it, it's going to go away. And my personal belief is that it is because both of those ways of looking at things have existed all of this time that we do survive. Because I think it takes the combination of people who are assimilating to make us seem less other and scary and evil, and people who are continuing to keep these traditions really strongly so that they don't get so diluted that they disappear.
Yeah. Gosh, I was going to ask something and I lost.
I talk a lot. I'll slow down. I'll stop. Not slow down. I'll just talk less. I talk a lot.
It's totally fine. I love it. Hearing all your responses, I think it's super helpful for me. I hope it's beneficial and helpful for others as well. So I'll go on to my next question, which you kind of started to talk about a little bit already. But what are some Jewish holidays or traditions? What Jewish holidays or traditions did your family observe? And can you explain what that was like for you and your family?
Sure. So my family of origin didn't celebrate much in terms of Jewish holidays. In fact, I'm not really sure we celebrated any of them, except when my grandparents, my father's parents, invited us over for the Sabbath meals, Friday night meals. Friday night is the beginning, because we're on a lunar calendar. A new day begins at sunset. So when the sun sets, the new day starts, and then it goes to the next sunset, because we're looking at the moon for when the days start and end. So our Sabbath the Jewish Sabbath starts at sunset on Friday and ends on Saturday, when you can see 3 stars in the sky, if you're being absolutely accurate. But there's also charts you can just read to find out when it's going to be in your area. So we sometimes did that. We celebrated Passover every year because we were invited to someplace with my grandparents. With my family that I've created and my community that I've created, we celebrate most of the holidays, not all of them. We celebrate the high holidays, which is Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, which are sort of the New Year celebrations or head of the year. Sukkot, which is a outdoor festival that goes on for 8 days. We do light menorahs for Hanukkah, but we don't make the big deal over Hanukkah that people make over Christmas. Tu B'Shavat, which is the birthday of the trees. We don't really celebrate that. Sometimes we are invited somewhere, but we don't really celebrate it, but it's a great holiday. Then Purim and Passover. And the other big one in the summer is Shavuot, which we don't actually do, but other people do. So those are kind of, I might have been forgetting something, but those are the main ones that I can remember now. And for me, it was great growing up whenever we were invited to anything, because I really love the holidays. I love the ritual. I love the festivities. And I love the community. So that was wonderful. And there's two different parts of most of the holidays. And when I say we celebrated, I'm talking about we had the festive meal celebration, the traditional foods and the prayers with the foods, or the storytelling with the foods. The services, the religious services, are not something that we ever really did when I was growing up. I do go to services for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but I don't necessarily stay the whole thing all the way to the end. And then as a child growing up, we went to a lot of bar mitzvahs and weddings and bat mitzvahs. So that's bar and bat mitzvahs are rite of passages, coming to when you are considered an adult, in that you are responsible for ethically and spiritually for Jewish practice, for a girl that's at 12 and for a boy that's at 13. Traditionally, boys, but now girls too, depending on what movement of Judaism you're in. That's when they are counted in prayer groups. There are certain prayers in Judaism where you have to have 10 people. It's called a minyan. And if you're Orthodox, it has to be 10 men. But if not, it can be 10 people. And so that's when you are counted as a member of the minyan and have all the responsibilities that go with that. And we went to many of those, again, not to the services, but to the big parties afterwards, with all the food and the excitement and the fun, the good food and the fun.
Well, you basically just answered my next several questions about bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. But did you ever have a bat mitzvah?
I did not have a bat mitzvah. It was not something my parents were interested in doing. I wish they would have, but I wasn't even allowed to go to religious school. So religious school is either on Saturday or Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesday if you're Jewish. And most of my friends on the East Coast when I was growing up went to Sunday school, and I was not permitted to go to Sunday school because my father thought it was all a bunch of hooey, and he didn't think that it was a good idea. But then my father, when I was a young child, and I said to him, my father was a psychiatrist. So I'll give you a little bit of background there. And when I went to my father and I said, Dad, who is Jesus Christ? And he said, because people are always talking about Jesus, who's Jesus Christ? And he said, oh, he was some nut that walked around thinking he was God. And for the life of me, I could not understand for a number of years why this particular nut who said he was God got so much attention when there were so many other crazy people walking around saying they were God. So that's the level of, that's how my father felt about religion in general, not just Judaism. So I didn't have any opportunity to be bat mitzvahed, but my daughter, we had a bat mitzvah for her.
Oh, cool. What was that like? I guess for her, what did it look like, or what
Yeah, it
tradition.
was a big deal. It was a big deal for everybody for different reasons. So it was a big deal for me because I think ritual and traditions are really rich and useful. And we have one in Judaism for coming of age. And I really wanted my daughter to experience it because I think that ritual and tradition have some kinds of power behind them, whether you believe in God or not. There's like a power to it of community and ritual and doing something that's been going on for, a few thousand years. My daughter was really nervous and uncomfortable about it because she doesn't believe in God, and she was going to get up there and have to say in front of everybody that she doesn't. And it was about me having a conversation with her a lot about, like, you are a member of this Jewish tribe, these Jewish people, and every single person, every Jew is necessary, and every Jew's belief is necessary and important, and you have the right and you have the need in terms of coming of age to stand up and say who you are and experience being welcomed as you are. So that was powerful for me. She right now she would say it wasn't a big deal and she didn't want to do it. But also just in terms of community, it's a little bit like in terms of, like, there was the season, right? All of her friends were turning 12 and 13, right? And so literally all these kids that she knew were having bar and bat mitzvahs. It was like the season, like in a coming out season, like the debutantes. Like it was just this whole couple of years of, sometimes every weekend there was a bar or bat mitzvah. Sometimes the girls they didn't want to wear the same thing to each event, but they didn't mind wearing what someone else did. So they started, eventually they would start switching outfits. So they weren't wearing the same thing, but they might be wearing something that somebody else wore the week before at a different one. But it was a big deal. And I also knew she was going to feel left out if she didn't, participate in some way in that. She was the first one in her group to have a bat mitzvah.
I want to say I find it amazing and so great how it sounds like, from what you're saying, in Judaism there's this respect for differing beliefs. And so it's like, even though your daughter and your father don't believe in a God, that's fine. And there's not a push to get people to believe, which is something you kind of see in some other religions. So.
Well, I would say, like a lot of communities, it's mixed, right? Like there are some Jewish communities that would not consider me Jewish. Like straight up, doesn't matter, I'm not Jewish because of what I do or what I don't do. And that think that, so there's very closed-minded people as well. And there are people that are really committed to getting Jews who are not practicing to practice more. And there are some communities that are very harsh about that, and some communities that are really, really gentle and just welcoming and just want you to love being a Jew and want you to come to do more of it because you love it, And so it really varies, in our community. I have to be honest about that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. My next question was, so in Judaism, do you have to pray or attend synagogue a certain amount of times per week or day or month? And if so, what happens if you don't do that?
So again, depending on where you fall in Jewish practice, there are 3 times a week, 3 times a day, I think that Jews go and pray in the more religious, observant, traditional Judaism. And I don't know if there's anything that happens to you. I mean, the whole question of concept of sin or of displeasing or disregarding things are I'm not Orthodox, so I can't really speak to that specifically. I know that if you're not Orthodox, I don't think there's I don't know of anything that happens. You don't have to confess or anything like that. I mean, we have Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we all get together communally, and we offer prayers and we ask for forgiveness. And we do it individually, and we do it as a community. And we stand up and we ask for forgiveness for a whole litany of misdeeds, including forgiveness for a confused heart, for what I've done out of a confused heart. That's one of the translations, because of course it's all in Hebrew or Aramaic or whatever. And, I don't speak any of that because I didn't go to Sunday school and learn Hebrew. And part of it is that we all stand together and we all say all of them, because even if we personally didn't do that thing, we are a group. And as a group, it's been done. It's caused harm in our community, and we're all capable of, no matter what it is. So when we ask for forgiveness, we also don't let anybody else stand alone. We all are. Another important thing about Judaism is that the individual is not more important than the group. Mm-hmm. We are Israel. We're not Israel, the country, but we are Jews. And so we stand together and we accept that we are all falling from the mark, which is how we kind of think about sin, and that we need to all communally ask forgiveness, even if we didn't personally do the thing that we're asking forgiveness for, because it impacts our community. At the same time, in Judaism, we believe that if you save a life, you save a whole world. So every life is also a whole world. So that's an interesting, for some people, contradiction, and for others, kind of just a kind of juicy thing to think about, write about.
That's cool. So the next one going along with that is, are there any special prayers that all Jewish people are supposed to know, or is there a certain way that you're supposed to pray?
Well, again, I'm not an expert on this. I mean, most of the time people are supposed to pray, I think, facing east towards Jerusalem. And in terms of special prayers that all people are supposed to know, there's a lot of ones that all people are supposed to know in Judaism. I think a very well-known one is the Shema. And then lots of people who aren't necessarily very religious will know some number of the prayers, the blessings over food, over bread, over wine, and over lighting the candles, because the Sabbath, the Shabbat, those are three of the important rituals: is to light the candles and say the prayer, to bless the wine and drink the wine, and to bless the challah, the bread, the ritual bread, and bless that. Additionally, there's a hand washing blessing that you're supposed to do before you do the bread. But again, that's more Orthodox people do that than non-Orthodox people.
Okay.
Oh, and there's one more, the Shehekianu. So Shehekianu is a prayer that you say whenever you're doing something brand new or something you haven't done in a super long time, like a year. That's a super long time. So if you haven't had a certain fruit in a year, you can say Shehekianu. If you're seeing friends after a long time, you can say Shehekianu. So yeah, it's a nice one.
Okay. So now when it comes to the synagogue, can non-Jewish people attend a synagogue? And also going along with this, because when I was looking up Judaism, I saw one article where it was referred to as the temple. So is it more common to say synagogue versus temple, or the other way around?
Synagogue is the most commonly used term. Yes, non-Jews are allowed into synagogues, but very Orthodox Jews will not go into a church. And of course, with the incredible rise in obvious anti-Semitism, killings and shootings, it's more complicated going into a synagogue, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. So yes, people are welcome, but there is this new unfortunate thing. In terms of temple was a term that was used, I think, a lot more in the 60s, 50s and 60s maybe. And Jews originally did sacrificial worship at the temple, and there were two temples. Both of them got destroyed, and once the second one was destroyed, Judaism switched. It transitioned. This is part of why else it was able to survive, to the creation, the writing down of all the oral tradition of Judaism, which is the Torah, which are all the stories and the rules and the litanies in what I guess if you're Christian, it's the Old Testament, but for us, it's the Bible, it's the Torah. And then Judaism became written down and codified that way, and you carried the Torah with you and didn't have to be in the temple specifically. And then another term that you hear among Orthodox Jews is the word shul, which is S-H-U-L, to refer to synagogue.
Okay, cool.
And I don't know if that's Hebrew or if that's Yiddish, because there's also, besides Yiddish as a sort of Jewish language, Jewish language, there's also Ladino, which is the same sort of thing. It's a combination of languages, including Hebrew, that was spoken and developed in the sort of coming out of Spain and the Mediterranean and Greece and the sort of more Eastern and Spanish area of the world. Yiddish is actually spoken and developed from Eastern European Judaism and Russian and that kind of area.
That reminds me of another question. So I think early on you had mentioned a little bit about the diaspora,
diaspora,
and branching off, and so so obviously Jewish people can come from many different parts of the world. Is what I'm learning. And I think it's a lot of people think, oh, they're all from Israel or descended from Israel, but
it's not at all. No, there's with all the ways that we were oppressed and tried to be annihilated, we kept moving and settling different places and taking on some of the traditions of those places culturally and moving again and being, kicked out again. And so it's very, very rich. So there are Asian Jews, there are Jews of color, there are Greek Jews, there are Iranian Jews, Afghani Jews. There's Jews. There's Arab Jews, there's Jews everywhere. And many of those places for many, many, many generations. In fact, one of the oldest Jewish communities is right near the Vatican. So, I mean, it's one of the oldest religions. So we've just been kind of around for a long time. And so, so the way it works is, or one of the things about being Jewish is, you could have never been to Israel. You could have nobody in Israel that you are related to and totally be Jewish and be really religiously Jewish or really culturally Jewish or super Jewish and Jewish American or Jewish from another country or culture or mixed. There's a lot of mixing because, there's just a lot of interaction and tapestry making in the world. So, and then in Israel, there are Israeli Jews, there are Israelis who are Christian, and there are Arab Israelis and Zoroastrian. I mean, there's all kinds of Israelis. They're not all Jewish. And we do recognize this is complicated. This gets really complicated. In the Torah, Israel is the land that was promised to Moses and all the patriarchs, and was considered our place. And there, if you read the Torah, there's like a lot of invading and getting rid of, so it's not like lovely, and so many people think of Israel as the Jewish homeland because of that. Then after the Holocaust, it was decided by a lot of other countries coming together that the Jews would be given, in a sense, Israel, because we needed a place that was our own, where we couldn't be eliminated. And that was a decision that was made by a lot of people coming together, a lot of countries coming together. Again, the Jews were a tiny little group, and we'd already lost 6 million people out of like whatever it was, like 8 million people. I mean, there wasn't a lot of us. That's probably not exactly the correct number, but and so that happened. And was that a mistake? Was that not a mistake? At this point, it doesn't matter whether it was a mistake or not a mistake. It was done, and now here we are. And so there's a lot. I don't think there are. I've never met a Jew who didn't have a strong opinion about Israel, one way or the other, or both. It's complicated. There's a difference between how some people feel about Israel and how people feel about the Israeli government. And there is a lot of energy around that. So Israel is a complicated issue for Jews, non-Jews. And I think it's only one piece, like not even like the most important piece of being Jewish is where you stand on Israel. Really, it isn't. But it is something that is being kind of called these days. All Jews are being called on the carpet regarding Israel in a way that is there's a lot to it that is reasonable to ask, totally reasonable questions, and there is another part to it, in my opinion, that is also has some anti-Semitic pieces to it. And teasing those two things out is really difficult, but it is part of the work of not allowing anti-Semitism to take more root than it already has, and also part of how Israel can become what it should be, because what it is now is not what it should be, in my opinion.
Wow. Well, this is all really interesting. So
I will say that if you're going to write about Jewish people, if you're going to write about them and they have politics at all in their life or social justice issues in their life, you're going to have to deal with Israel one way or the other, how your character experiences that and experiences what's going on in their world. If you're writing contemporary, kind of what's going on in the background and how it's impacting them. You don't have to do that if you're just writing and it's not about anything political, because I mean, we don't sit around all the time talking about Israel. We do talk about it, but we don't sit around all day talking about it all the time. But if you're going to write a character who is struggling with any kind of injustice or social justice, you're going to have to come up with how they identify as a Jew, like how Jewish they feel, and either they themselves or they're going to be confronted by at a certain age. Certain ages and in certain places are going to be confronted by this question. Certainly, if like YA, I mean, if they're in college, which I guess is a little higher than YA, but even in high school, there's going to be conversation that's most likely going to come up.
Right. So, my next question I had was, so if someone were to convert to Judaism, what does that process look like? And are there any ceremonies or rituals they have to participate in for the conversion?
Yes. We're not a big religion of conversion. We don't go out looking to convert people. Like, not at all. We're not super interested. Like, there's no faction or part of Judaism that's looking to gather more Jews. That said, when somebody feels the desire to convert, there's a process, and it's a process of a lot of learning and doing, and there's usually a rabbi involved that is your sort of mentor or your teacher, and you go through a series of, sometimes there's classes in the community, sometimes it's one-on-one study, sometimes it's both, and it culminates for most people, it culminates in, well, okay, for everyone, it should culminate in a ritual purification in water. So baptism comes out of the Jewish practice of mikvah, or purification. And so a person who, when the whole process is completed and the final prayers are done, they go into the mikvah, they immerse in the mikvah, and they come out now with their regular soul and their Jewish soul. If you're a man, and again, this is going to depend on which kind of Judaism, which flavor you're going to do. If you're in a more Orthodox Judaism and you have not been circumcised, and even if you have been circumcised, there is something. Well, if you're circumcised, there's a little nick that happens right before you go into the mikvah on your penis. And if you're not circumcised, I don't really know about that. I don't know if you have to get a real circumcision, the whole 9 yards, or whether the little nick, but I don't know. I think you actually have to, or at least you used to have to get the whole thing, but I don't know what's going on with that, because I'm not Orthodox, and I'm not an Orthodox man, and I haven't asked any of my Orthodox friends that question anytime recently.
All right. So let me see. Within Judaism, are there any specific beliefs about the afterlife, or what the purpose of our life is?
Well, the purpose of our life is to repair the world. The idea that when the world was created, all these, I'm not going to get it totally right, but there were all these sparks that, got broken, and maybe we all have those sparks inside ourselves, and our job is to repair the world, to bring it back to a place of justice and mercy and kindness, and to heal it, and that when we do that, Mashiach will come. So we don't believe in Judaism that the Messiah has come. We believe the second coming. We don't believe that. Okay, not the second coming. We don't believe that the Mashiach, like Christianity believes that Jesus was the Messiah. Right. We don't hold that was true, that Jesus was not the Messiah, and that we're still waiting for the Messiah. So when we achieve that repair, when we've been successful, then Mashiach, Messiah, will come. And at that time, supposedly everybody will come back from being dead. There's a part of Judaism that discusses reincarnation. There's a part of Judaism that discusses an afterlife, but the afterlife is kind of more like a holding place. And some rabbis talk about it as there's actually like levels of where you're sitting there in the afterlife because of how righteous or not righteous you've been. But other people hold by a belief that there's just really this kind of, it's not about the afterlife. Judaism isn't about the afterlife. It's about what you do here to help bring about the repair of the world. And then when Mashiach comes, we all come back.
Now, isn't there kind of like you were saying before, there's all these different flavors of Judaism. Isn't there, trying to think, what was the term? Messianic Jews?
Messianic. Yeah,
And
I don't know a whole lot about Messianic Jews, but in Jewish circles, for the most part, Messianic Jews are not considered members. Like, if you think of Judaism as a tent, which is, we use that term a lot in Judaism, they are not members of the tent because they are, in some sense or another, really Christian believers.
because
So
I
and some
know.
people don't agree with that, but a lot of people, I would say, draw a line at Messianic Judaism.
Okay, I asked that because I know I've heard that term, and it said that Messianic Jews do believe that Jesus was the Messiah.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to not think that to be sort of counted under most Jewish tents.
Got it. Okay. Um, I know someone was asking this question earlier, and I did have it on my list of questions to ask. But can you explain a little bit about the diet? I know there's some things that are considered kosher, or you can't eat it. So what, like, do you and your family follow any dietary restrictions? And what are they like?
Yeah, sure. So you're referring to people who keep kosher. Again, more religious Jews, observant Jews keep kosher. Some Jews who are not in those groups, there are plenty of Reconstructionist or Reform Jews that have elected to keep kosher because that's what they want to do. And it's interesting keeping kosher. Again, there's what's actually written in the Torah, like what is actually written down that you can read. And then there's how that has been interpreted and made into custom, tradition, or law, if you want to call it that. So if you actually look at the Torah, there's a couple of lines. One says something, I'm not going to get this all right. Like I said, I'm not a Torah scholar or anything near that. But one of them is that you will not, something about not boiling a calf in its mother's, a calf in its mother's milk. Okay. Don't boil a calf meat in its mother's milk, something like that. And so from that comes, we don't eat milk and meat. We separate those two things from each other. And so there's different plates, different silverware, sometimes different sinks. And you can't have a cheeseburger or milk with your steak or Alfredo sauce on your steak or, whatever. So there's the mixing of those two things. There's another passage that has to do with not eating, or has to do with the cloven foot, whether the foot of the animal is cloven or not, and whether this sea creature has scales and fins. Mm-hmm. And so from those come other restrictions, like you can't eat pork and you can't eat, I don't remember what was the other one.
Shrimp.
Well, shrimp comes from it has to have scales and fins. That's the sort of water creature thing. And then the sort of more farm animal or any kind of animal is the cloven foot part. Mm-hmm. But then the rabbis, so that was already an interpretation, right, of what the words were. And then the rabbis also put what some people call them gates around other things so that people wouldn't make mistakes. So what do I mean by that? I don't know if I'll get this right because I don't follow any of this. So besides foods that are dairy and foods that are meat, there's also foods that are neither. And so they can be eaten with meat or with milk. Okay. It's complicated. Mm-hmm. And those foods, like one of the foods that is considered neither dairy nor meat, and this is going to be weird, is eggs. Now you would think it would be meat because or you would think it's meat because it's an egg of a living creature, but it's not. And so you can have eggs. I hope I have this right. You can have eggs with meat and you can have eggs with dairy.
So, okay, interesting.
And some things like chicken is meat, but the egg is not. So I can't explain it. It's complicated, and different communities follow different practices and are more or less stringent. And even within one community, there can be way more stringent people and less stringent people. Like people in the same community, in the same group, with the same restrictions or dietary traditions, and one family might not be willing to eat at the other family's house because they're not kosher enough. And a lot of foods, a lot of prepared foods have symbols, which are called hechshers, on them to indicate whether they are kosher or not. And some of these symbols, some people only will accept certain ones of those symbols as being kosher enough. Like they don't take the K, but they take the OU. So it's very, it can get extremely complicated. But I just wanted to point out that it comes from just a couple of passages in the Torah that don't go into such detail. But the rabbis, a lot of what they do is extrapolate so that we have sort of a way of living life in every aspect of life based on text.
Okay. Wow. This has all been super interesting so far. So I just have a couple questions left. And if anyone watching the live has any questions, pop them into the chat box, and we can get to them. But I just had a couple questions left. The next one was, when it comes to writing Jewish characters, in your opinion, what do you think writers usually get wrong when writing a Jewish character?
Yeah, I think that what they maybe get wrong is, as you can tell from this conversation we've been having, there's a lot of ways of showing up Jewish, and there's a lot of ways of identifying with it, and whether it's cultural or whether it's religious or spiritual or ethical, there's just lots of different layers, and not everybody is connected to all the layers. I think some things that people get wrong are the nuance. Well, the first thing that people can get wrong is they can fall into stereotypes of Jews and their relationship with money, their relationship with power, their relationship with certain industries, law, entertainment, those kinds of things. I think also people can really get it wrong in terms of people's relationship to Israel, and Israel versus the government, Israel in general. And also that you can have one family or that has a lot of different beliefs going on, a lot of levels, or even whole communities where it's not all the same, but it's under one umbrella. I think that one of the biggest, the most egregious thing I see in writing and television is the, what's the word I want to do? The demonization of Orthodox Judaism. So I think this is like one of those really anti-Semitic tropes. And I think a lot of Jews buy into it. And I'm not saying that there aren't repressive aspects of Orthodox Judaism. There's repressive aspects of all communities. And there are aspects of orthodoxy that are problematic for people that are not Orthodox and for lots of people who are Orthodox, right? But it's not a monolith. And what we see over and over again is really negative interpretations and renditions and portrayals of Orthodox Judaism, particularly as it relates to women and how men are portrayed. And, it makes a better story, like that kind of drama and like, oh, I've escaped. And there's this whole sort of, there's this other kind of trope, this writing trope that we use when we talk about that. So I think one of the things that I would like to see is not to have that kind of black and white, all or nothing rendition of and portrayals of Orthodox Jews. And similarly, I grew up in the era where people would call, this is one that we know you weren't supposed to use back then. We don't hear it much anymore, but, Jewish princesses, like, oh, you're such a princess. So I think that's another stereotype that, again, is very one-dimensional. I do want to just jump back now because I thought of something else that really is hard for some people who are Jews and maybe not for others. But please, everybody, don't use the term Nazi. Like, oh, you're such a grammar Nazi. Oh, you're such a blah Nazi. Okay, that is not okay. It is really diminishing what happened and who these people are and what they stand for. And I know nobody means it that way, but as we all know, intention and impact are not the same thing. So I'd like everybody to please no longer use the word Nazi as part of a description, unless you're actually talking about an actual Nazi.
Right. So unless you're writing historical fiction with the Nazis.
Right. Obviously, if you're writing about Nazis, but to use it as a term to describe somebody who's uptight about something, that's not appropriate. And that is a microaggression, and it's kind of anti-Semitic.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so my last question here is, what do you really want writers to know when writing a Jewish character? What should they keep in mind? And you kind of touched on this already, but what stereotypes do you just need to get rid of?
Yeah, all those ones I talked about, the totally terrible Orthodox community, the Jewish princess, all the other stuff, all the other anti-Semitic tropes that I've talked about just now and also throughout this conversation. I want people to know that when they're writing Jewish characters, that if they're not Jewish, even if they are Jewish, that Jews are really dimensional and layered, and they do live with contradiction. And they do live with for the most part, again, I'm not going to talk about all Jews, but there is built into Judaism a concern for a sense of responsibility. And sometimes that responsibility can be mangled into a very narcissistic or greedy sensibility. And we certainly can all think of figures in our time that are Jewish that have demonstrated that. But there are also way more people who have connected to that sense of responsibility and take it in a social, environmental, justice way. And that's a big part of how we are, who we are, however we identify. So I would highly, highly recommend that you have a sensitivity reader read if you have Jewish characters, and that, a Jewish person can be almost anything. You just need to be able to reconcile why they're like that, So if you have a Jewish character who's eating a ham sandwich, lots of Jews eat ham sandwiches and spare ribs and all kinds of things like that. It's not a problem. However, you do want to have a sense of that character's life. Like, did they grow up eating ham? Like, their family was not, and what about their grandparents? Because those kinds of things are going to impact how they are in your story and how they develop as a character. And you don't necessarily always have to come back and explain it. Well, her grandmother and da-da. It's not that you have to have that whole background. It's like any kind of writing, right? Your characters, whether they're your main character or an ancillary character, they have to be believable, and they shouldn't leave people who identify with them confused. So learn about your character, give them a history, check with a sensitivity reader, and then be courageous, but be grounded in what is real. Don't make things up about Jews. Don't make things up about anybody, but I'm talking about Jews. Don't make things up about us, because it's generally more complicated, and often you'll find Jewish values woven into, and sometimes mangled versions, but nevertheless woven into our actions, our choices.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And that's all the same advice I usually tell anyone when writing a diverse character.
It's not different.
Yeah. I did want to ask, going back a little bit, because you mentioned certain stereotypes and tropes, and one of them you said was the princess. That's not one that I'm familiar with, so can you explain what that trope is, what it looks like?
Sure, a Jewish princess is very materialistic, self-centered, whiny, entitled. She doesn't like her nose. It's her Semitic nose, so she has a nose job. She, sexually, she won't give a blowjob. There's like, it's really just a really misogynistic view of Jewish women. And it has to do with them not feeling beautiful with their noses as they are, and their hair, ironing hair and straightening hair, and having your nose done, and sort of trying to fit into what we would also microaggressively call WASP culture, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, yes. So it's a sort of antithesis of that stereotype, or the desire for a Jewish woman to sublimate her own self and become sort of a caricature of that. Okay. Jewish princes, that was another term that was also used. These are older ones. I'm older. And those were the kind of stereotypes that we were dealing with when I was, younger, in my 20s and teens. And I think by the time I got to my 30s, it was less out there, but it was a big one for a long time if you read older works and older movies.
Well, speaking of reading older works and older movies and stuff, one thing, so I have a online course, how to write diverse characters, and in that course I have a section where we talk about research and how to do research and stuff, and one of the things I bring up is make sure, if you're writing about a certain group, try to read authors from that background that you're writing about. So my question is, are there any books or authors that you would recommend reading if someone is wanting to write a Jewish character and learn more about how Jewish people write themselves? And are there any books or authors you would recommend, or even movies?
That is a great question, Vanessa. And I don't know how to answer it, because I think it would depend on whether you were writing contemporary or historical, whether you were writing a religious Jew or a less religious Jew. So I don't know how to answer that question. There's a lot of great, there are many wonderful Jewish stories by Jewish authors, and many wonderful movies as well. I have favorite Jewish authors. One of my very favorite Jewish authors is Grace Paley, who is no longer alive. And she was not a religious Jew. She was a socialist Jew. And she's an amazing writer, and she kind of changed all of short story writing. She was one of the grandmothers of the modern short story. But in terms of movies or books specifically that would sort of like capture the Jewish experience, I don't feel qualified to do that. And I'd want to know, what era, what genre, or what time period we'd be talking about.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So that's pretty much all the questions I had, I think. If anyone else has any questions you'd like to ask Bonni, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box if you have any questions. But I think that's all I had for today. This was great having you here and chatting with you about all of this. Feel like I learned a lot, but I also know that I'll probably have to rewatch this afterward and get more out of it. So thank you for being here. And did you want to, for anyone watching, I do have all of Bonnie's links in the description box. So her website, her social media links, you can go follow her there. And her link to her book. What was the name
Room
again?
to Write. Room to Write.
So that is linked down below as well. And did you have any last?
Yeah, first, I really want to thank you for having me. I love having these kind of conversations, and I think it's so important, especially now. And I think it's really wonderful when writers take the time to listen and learn and think about these things. I also have been teaching writing for years, and I am most happy to help anybody as a sensitivity reader. If I'm not familiar enough with the time period or whatever it is, I can certainly refer you to someone else. But keep writing. Don't be afraid to write about Jews, and let Jews help you with that, Jewish writers. And Vanessa, thank you for having such a wonderful series here for all of us to benefit from.
Yeah, no problem. And Wesley said, Bonni, you seem incredibly able.
Thank you.
British goodbye for now. Bye.
Goodbye.
So yeah, thanks. Oh, and just to let you guys know, next month again, I think is going to be where September is next month.
Yeah, already.
Line already. Oh, actually, I do not have a set date for this yet. But next month, I will be doing another interview with someone in the disability community and talking about disability and chronic illness. So if you want to come back and check that out, more than welcome. And I think that is it. So I hope everyone has a good night. Thank you again, Bonni. And I will see you guys. Bye.